to everyone who's joining today. We're here with Roberta Washburn, who's our Director of Solar Operations here at Kokosing Solar.
Hi everyone, Roberta Washburn, Director of Solar Operations with Kokosing Solar. I've been with our team for 7 years. I'm also a member of the Amicus Solar Cooperative Board. I'm lucky enough I get to lead our team on commercial projects, residential, and O&M projects.
So talking about the commercial solar tax credit, starting from the top, can you explain what Section 48 covers as it stands now and how it's a benefit to commercial solar projects?
Sure, absolutely. So, commercial solar projects, companies are able to get this 30% tax credit through the ability to install solar on their companies. And then, obviously they're consulting their tax professionals. Again, we're not tax professionals, but they're working with their professionals to be able to determine how much of that credit they can take. And is it in year one? Does it need to be in future years? And also, some customers are not just folks who are for-profit companies. There are nonprofits and municipalities that have been able to take advantage of direct pay incentives too, and that allows them to also take advantage of that 30%. And in some cases, there are adders that folks can get depending on what content that they're using to build their projects with and what areas they're in. Are they in an energy community or not in an energy community? So there's lots of components that go into folks who are kind of working outside of the residential world. So anyone that's in this commercial perspective. What we have had historically is something very similar to the residential 30% through 2032 that companies could take. These projects tend to take a long time to develop, which is a little bit different than the residential world. A residential project usually comes in, we speak with customers, we're able to get that contract rolling relatively quickly. From a commercial perspective, and a lot of times it's variant on the size of the projects, it can take months to develop a project, get it through the approval process, and be able to get to the point that the contract actually gets signed. The way the changes that came out in 48 were that came from the House would put this threshold on projects. And this is what's really critical to it is rather than giving us until 2028 or 2032 or whatever that might be to finish a project, they've added this complexity that says basically if you want to be able to be eligible for this tax credit, you're going to need to have commenced construction within 60 days of the bill being signed essentially by the president. And so if the president were to sign the bill on July 4th, let's just use that as an example, customers would have 60 days from that point to have been under contract and spent a portion of their project, typically 5% to safe harbor it, or have had to have a significant amount of construction actually start on site. That time frame is very, very short. That provision stays in the current legislation. It's going to create a fury of activity of folks wanting to get signed and procure materials that are critical to the project success. So that has me worrying about all of the vendors being able to supply what everyone needs in order to satisfy some of that commence construction requirements that's going to need to happen. And I'm worried that folks who might have signed the contract might not be able to get to that 5%. And so they are with this large investment and then not able to take that tax credit because they didn't get, commence construction within that 60-day period. That is just a really, really short timeline for folks because even if a project signs on the day that the president would sign the order into the legislation into law, projects coming in still have to go through a design process and approval process and interconnections. You can order materials and have materials early, but a lot of the information that you do at the beginning of a project really informs everything you need. And so we don't want wasted money going into projects that we're going to then have to change materials as we get them through the process. So I think 60 days is just such a tight timeline. I was super shocked when I seen that come out. If someone gets there, are able to capture that safe harbor, commence construction in that 60 days, as long as their project finishes by 2028, they're still going to be able to get their tax credit. But that's just such a tight timeline for folks, 60 days, when everyone in the market is going to be trying to do the same thing in that short period of time. I think the impact that it's going to have to customers who've been working a long time to develop these projects, that's problematic for them to be able to get that far down the road so they can get the tax credit. Obviously, we're going to do all we can to support those customers, and we're already trying to get that sense of urgency. Like, if you're going to sign your contract this year, let's get it signed, let's get it into development so that we can determine what materials you're going to need in case this would get signed into law. We can at least help folks get further down the path. So there is this sense of urgency for folks. Hopefully they won't need it quite as much, and that this law will change in the Senate, but there's no guarantee that that's going to happen. So
And you mentioned the year 2028. So projects that get signed in the next 60 days, if they are able to safe harbor and secure 5% of the materials, then as long as they're built in the next 4 years, by 2028, they're good to go.
they should be good to go as long as they have the tax appetite, at least how the bill reads in the Senate right now that the House passed. I think any of that could change. We don't know what's going to come out of the Senate. I think our ask, and ideally, would be that we could have the same thing that we've asked for in the residential world. Give us 5 years so that we can get these projects developed and installed, because the same things, these companies need to be able to provide their energy resilience to our municipalities. Just like there's just such this great need for energy, this tax credit really helps support people going solar and trying to do their portion to help support our grid.
What is the foreign entities of concern? I know the 2028, the 60 days, and then there's this foreign entities of concern provision in the law as it's written right now. What is that?
Yeah, so that a lot of folks will refer to that as FEOC. And so that has a big component on where the materials are manufactured, or components of the material of the final product are manufactured. And I think from my perspective, like, this is the one thing that seems the least clear in all of the things that have made it from the House to the Senate, is like the implications of FEOC and the timelines and what manufacturers would be involved in that. We just needed some additional clarity around that, and to make sure that there's plenty of time for manufacturers to make that shift to be compliant with this. Because if they're not able to have that runway to make that shift, it's really going to have an impact on our market, that we won't be able to get the materials we need to get to allow these projects to continue to qualify for these tax credits. So, in addition to these expansions for 25D residential and 48 for the commercial space and municipalities, this FEOC rule is actually very, very important, because if those two, 48 and 25, get their expansion, but nothing happens with the FEOC rule, then that's problematic, because we can go sell solar as much as we want. But if we can't get the materials that qualify, we can't go build the solar and still make these projects viable. Like with anything, when you're shifting, it's important to have this like planned out roadmap. This needs to happen so that this can happen, and then this can happen, and then this can happen. It's got to be really methodical. And so hopefully, as this goes through the Senate, we will get some clarity around FEOC. There'll be this runway for it for the manufacturers, and we'll understand who's involved in it so that we can then take the projects in our pipeline and new projects coming in and be able to shift those projects to meet all of those guidelines. But it's just not something that anyone's going to be able to meet overnight.
Yeah. So FEOC is pretty unclear. We don't really understand what the rules behind that would be. What we do understand is that the foreign entities of concern provision in the House bill is that it would require manufacturers to supply components from very specific countries. Is that right?
There are a list of countries that components and finished goods could not be part of, or it would hurt the tax credits that these customers are trying to get. And a lot of companies have been working hard and diligently to bring their manufacturing into the States. So that's helpful, but it's just not going to be enough if this FEOC were to go into place right away.
Commercial solar tax credits, is there anything we haven't hit on?
I mean, there is this 48Y that we could talk about that we weren't specifically talking about. So 48Y is really for kind of PPA leases. So there are some commercial companies out here that are selling this product that makes it affordable for homeowners to be able to go solar, but essentially lease their equipment from the providers. And so originally, we didn't know how 48Y was going to be impacted. And the way that it is currently written with the Senate and the House is that 48Y would be impacted just like everything else is impacted relatively immediately. You maybe don't hear about it as much around our office or maybe as much in some other companies, but it is very important part of what is happening because it does continue to help make solar affordable for folks. At some point, yes, we're going to need to stand on our own out in this industry and be able to not have tax credits. And I think we all understand that, but um, we need a little bit bigger road. We need a little bit bigger runway than, just this short period of time, 60 days or 6 months. I mean, this year almost halfway over already. And so that's just really a tight timeline.
I guess the last question I'll leave you with, what are we encouraging our followers to do?
I think there are 2 action items that I would encourage folks to do. One, if you've been thinking about going solar and you want to get your project done so you can get installed this year, now's the time to sign your contract, contact your installer. The other thing you can do is you can contact your legislators, the Senate, your senators, your representatives, and ask them to help extend these tax credits for the next 5 years. I think the more that they hear from the constituents within their states, the more that they're able to support those folks.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Roberta. And I'm sure within the next couple weeks, we'll be coming at you again with more updates.
Sounds great. Looking forward to providing more updates for folks. We'll keep you as informed as we can, and we're following everything closely. Thanks again for joining us today.